Trevor Cody, Forestry Brigade. Just like to take a point Kevin made, that the understanding of what's asset to one person is can be worthless to someone else. But going back into 2001 fires up on the Goobang, one of the big problems we had was convincing outside, and what we call outside, these were basically coastal rural fires, RFS personnel, that grass was our asset, and we'd like them to put out, but they sort of, some of them stubbornly refused to put grass out because they didn't see it as an asset. I'm more worried about a house. Fences, livestock and grass didn't really matter all that much. That's a comment I'd like to make, and probably to Kevin or Ross, the understanding of, and we've talked about asset protection zone burning now, zone burning. What's the understanding of that? Is there, you probably have I don't understand, I find it hard to understand and to probably understand the timing of the right time to burn those zones. Like every 3 years doesn't appear to be quite right in my mind, that you don't do the proper job if you do it every 3 years, or, I mean, should we be looking at some other way of assessing it?
I might have a go at answering that. The treatment rotation or frequency of an asset protection zone will depend on the fuel type and the fuel accumulation, which obviously depends on the vegetation type in question. A grassland will be different than a tall forest, a tall eucalypt forest. However, notwithstanding that, we now know from recent research, some of it based on 2009 Victorian fires, that in terms of protection of property, treatment of asset protection zones is absolutely critical to the reduction of risk. And we talk about risk. What does reduction of risk mean? Well, the probability or chance of losing something that we value. So in this case, the house. So the answer to your question is, totally dependent on the context. But we know, for example, in forested environments in southeastern Australia, stuff that's close to houses, literally tens of metres, is absolutely critical to the survival of the house. However, the condition of forest, the condition of the forest up to 1 kilometre away from the house is influencing the probability of loss. We now know that. We can now quantify that. That may actually lead us into questioning whether our asset protection and strategic zones are actually adequate. So there are major challenges still in coming to some definite conclusion about how we should be treating those zones. But it looks like the zone of influence around property, that is critical to the survival of property, is quite large. We may, in the next few years, see some re-evaluation of what's in our risk plans in terms of the way we zone things. So I can't give you a definitive answer about treatment of any asset protection zone without knowing exactly what it is. And of course, in a grassy area, an appropriate treatment of an asset protection zone may not be burning it, may be slashing and grazing it.
Yeah, but there's an example, I guess, in Victoria, where on the coastal area, down the Otways, where it's really hard to actually burn up against people's houses because we're probably going to set fire to their houses even under mild conditions. And so it's probably a planning issue of the past, and we've got to live with that. So basically the decision that has been made there is that about 40 metres away from the houses, providing the landowner also plays their part, there's mechanical modification to the fuels there. So from an environmental point of view, it's just it's changing dramatically, I was going to say destroying, changing dramatically the structure of the vegetation through mechanical means, but that can be done any time of the year almost, and it gives you an option. But then it actually gives you a boundary. What's happening, I guess, for the 2 or 3 kilometres out beyond that is you can actually do some less frequent planned burning, if you like, that actually really reinforces that area. So the combination of that mechanical work for 40 metres plus some other prescribed burning has been the solution there. Trying to do prescribed burning right up against people's fences is really costly and expensive, and it's often you can't do it, so the window of opportunity is narrow. Putting that 40 metre modified fuel zone in between actually allows you to do that much more safely, and if there is a fire event, you've got access along the backs of properties and so on. But that, to me, that's a signature of bad planning in the past. And I think, I know in New South Wales there's been a lot done to prevent that happening in the future, but you've still got a legacy of a massive, how many thousands of kilometres? Say
Well,
7 or something.
and you're right, Kevin. I mean, like, if you look at that interface of 1.3 million properties, and we've had the legislation in place now in New South Wales since 2002, where the new development, subdivisions or integrated development requires a bushfire safety authority from the RFS, and the application of planning for bushfire protection otherwise for normal subdivision. We've processed about, or just under 90,000 development applications. Now that number of properties will change because a subdivision could include multiple properties, but let's just say there's 90,000 applications that have been addressed. That's a great number, but it's, on the flip side, it's a negligible number compared to 1.3 million legacy development. So there is some real challenges, or there are some real challenges. And even though the legislative framework came into effect in 2002, there were a number of areas, particularly around the Greater Sydney area and coastal areas, where the adoption of a planning code was voluntary, and plenty of councils did apply that in the earlier days. So you've got a bit of a mixture of the quality of development, and those sorts of, you know, fuel-free areas, the asset protection zones are now integrated into planning design and provide that, not only the buffer for the protection of the property, but also the safety parameters for firefighters operating in and around those developments to try and save property.
Right. Chair. I think for the panel's information, timing of the exercise is really interesting. One of the things that came out of the Goobang fire and the work that Alex Green and Peter Brookhouse really from National Parks and Alex Green, I actually identified in the model that we have done here locally, which was based on the risk plan guidelines. They identified, of course, that we didn't have any treatment for land management zones. So in 2006, we actually got land management zones into the risk plan. That was a big step forward, And so that's what was really holding us up, was that actually happened. And then, of course, we needed to model that and work that thing through. And it's not really been until 2010 that we've actually rolled the whole plan out across the state. So we're now starting to see the results of some of that early work in 2000 to 2006 coming to fruition. There's more to do, and we will get there.
Brian? Graham's commented about the planning process. I think that, and David made comment about the agency support and the interaction with the agencies and the agency relationships, but I think that an important factor that needs also to be acknowledged is that the response of government subsequent to the 2009 Victorian Royal Commission, and that is the input of dollars in 2010 into the Rural Fire Service and into the National Parks, into the forestry, to provide a whole-of-government approach to hazard reduction, at least in terms of funding. I think that in the last 4 to 6 years, would it be shown, the increased federal monies into trail works and bushfire mitigation works, those increased dollars, together with the base mapping, has provided the springboard for the current position, at least to be able to move forward. Hazard reduction, particularly involving aircraft, is quite an expensive exercise, but nevertheless, those extra funds are available for those agencies. Fortunately, we're in the position that the current government has continued those programs. They have a life of 4 years.
Well, any government cycles 4 years. Yeah.
So the important thing is that we, as an organisation, understand that we still need to keep pressure on government to keep the value of those extra dollars across the agencies, that the agencies are funded properly to carry out the works that are necessary to manage their estate, but also that the money that the government has invested into hazard reduction and mitigation works and the other programs to support our communities are recognised within the organisations.
Graham, you wanted to comment?
You just add to that, at a state level, the coordinating committee, of course, has to oversee these risk plans and process, and to try and help encourage some of the activity of these BFMCs. The coordinating committee has been moving steadily around the state over the last 3 or 4 years. I think our first step away from Sydney was Tacoma about 6 or 7 years ago. That was quite an illuminating exercise for us, the coordinating committee.
Yeah.
And our last one, you correct me, I think it was Cobar. I've just forgotten.
Cobar, Dubbo, Albury. We've done a few of them.
You've done. What we're finding of those is that whilst the presentations from the various zones that so we go to Cobar, we had 4 presentations by the 4 different BFMCs, and in fact you could see it was a strength and weakness building exercise in the process, and I think it's very, very appropriate that we're actually out there doing it.
And as a matter of fact, the committee only met today, and I think we program about 4 meetings a year, is that right? 4 meetings a year, and at least 50% of those we're looking at having them regionally based, so we can actually pull the BFMCs in, let them go through individually what they're doing, what their challenges are there any issues locally that we can help with, blah, blah, blah. And that's, as Graham says, in the last 5 years, it's one of the things we've been doing, and there's a lot of benefit both ways that's come out of it.
Yep. Graham?
Taking off the state hat and putting on the local BFMC hat, Chair, it's really useful to see what's happened here in this zone in terms of you saw on the figures earlier that 92-93% of this area is private land holding. And one of the things that's come out of the risk plan here locally since 2004-5, steadily there's been a progression or an uptake or a willingness by private landholders to actually come in a coordinated fashion to do some of the hazard reduction work. And the reality is that there's actually been about a generation lost in doing that work. My grandfather, even my father, used to do that work without any planning, but they were very skilled at it. So it's great to see that being picked up at long last, and that's slowly rolling around the state. And that may prompt somebody within the room here, who is a landholder, to make some comments. I'm looking at Trevor or Steve, because they're close to an interface. But so that in fact, I know of a few cases in this zone where landholders have actually put their hand up and say, I can't do it on my own, but can you incorporate this in your planning, in the risk plan? So that's been a very positive outcome.
Trevor or Steve, you want to take up the invitation?
Well, actually, Graham, there hasn't been a lot of private land set aside for hazard reduction in our grade area. I don't know why that is. I suppose it's
A bit south of you.
a bit south of us in Baldy.
More towards Manilda, that area.
Yeah, there's a fair bit down that way. But just in our brigade area, there's not a lot. It's probably because we're more focused on the Goobang itself rather than private land. But it sort of keeps us occupied.
Robert, we can read your name
Been home even. Yeah, Robert Hicks, the Springside Rural Fire Brigade. Partly because of my job and what I do with my private life, I move around a lot. And over the last 20 years, from my observations, I'd like to take my hat off, or I do take my hat off, to all the people that have been associated with fire management, right from the level like that picture there on the wall, right through to the sort of things that you people are doing. And one of the things that I want to acknowledge quite strongly, because I have for a while noted and advocating, a lot of councils are moving the heavy vegetation further away from the curbside. I don't mean remove trees from roadways totally, but that is allowing for a lot more mechanical tidiness, if you like, on the sides of the roads, and the amount of traffic we've got now and the amount of people that still do that out the window while they're going. That won't affect the it won't affect, like, say, the fire material, the burning material in say, Pilliga Forest, for instance.
Yes.
But it does clean the edges up, it does reduce the ignition points, if I could call it that. And I think it's a very hard thing to measure, how many councils do and don't do what they do, and some do more than others, and it's hard to acknowledge that.
There's
But I think it's a great
there's
move.
one way to do it, Robert, and we've started doing it. We don't give them money until they tell us what they're doing. It is a serious point, because there's got to be a motivator to identify, capture and report on what's being done. And today, we're channeling more money than ever directly to local government to assist in getting a lot of this work done. I think it's also fair to say that certainly in western areas of New South Wales, a lot of that work has not been done in the last few decades because the risk simply hasn't been there. Nothing's been able to grow. But now with the abundance of growth, everyone's saying, crikey, we've got a challenge, we've got to get on with it. Obviously they focus on the arterial roads, the high volume roads, but anyone that drives around gets off the main drag, you notice where the priority starts to slip. But you can only do so much at the time, and if we could have a crystal ball and know where the next ignition's going to be and when it's going to be, it'd be really easy to do hazard reduction and roadside veg management and all those sorts of things. So they do take a risk-based approach to it, and I acknowledge very much the state road bodies, but also council, because there is a focus on making sure everyone's working together and stretching that money to get the work done where it's needed most. And particularly now, with the abundance of fuel growth we've got across the state, it's actually about having a cycle of works that is maintained to keep that fuel, because you do it once a year and it grows back by the time we get into the next season.
Yeah.
Gentleman in the blue shirt.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Bob Standage, I'm a group captain of Penobscot Zone. Observed here, like with all these agencies here, like we've got the RSF, the Forestry, National Parks, the councils. There's one agency I've often wondered who has control of it, and that's the people who've got control of the rail corridors.
Yep.
Now, okay, if you look at the rail corridors, especially on the high country around in the Penobscot Zone, there's a tremendous amount of vegetation in that area, so there's no hazard reduction ever take place. So are they on our committee? Are they all on themselves, or what's the situation?
They are on committees, and again, the membership on committees is relevant to who's got land in the area. So I won't say they're on every committee, because not everyone's got rail interests or whatever, but they are on committees, and I hear that comment periodically, but give me an example of where a rail is not doing hazard reduction, or more particularly, everywhere where it's brought to their attention, they are a responsive agency and they will do it. Often what happens is the risk to their corridors is not identified, so therefore they don't think there's a work to be done. So once you identify through a BFMC or through direct liaison with them, particularly if it's a hazard complaint or something like that as an example, they're very prompt in actually addressing the hazard. We do know that rail lines are not an uncommon source of ignition, and we've done a lot of education, particularly over the last 10 to 15 years, with their track winding activities, and when the best time is to do that, or not to do it, more importantly, and actually working with us in terms of what is going on and putting other things in place to help with the likely ignitions that come out of that. So they are a player, and they are generally, from my experience, a very responsive contributor to getting work done. Often there's an ignorance there, whether that's convenient or otherwise, I'm not going to comment on, but it's like anyone, if you only know what you know, if you don't know there's a hazard or someone wants you to do something about something, you may not do it. So
In the railway system, like the people who maintain the track change from time to time.
correct.
And so, one group of people coming now is a new group actually managing the track.
And the BFMCs, the reason we focus on local decisions and discussions is because the personalities change. It's about maintaining those contacts to make sure the local people are the right people to get things done. Occasionally, an executive officer like a David or someone will ring the region or talk to us at state level and say, I'm having trouble with X, and I don't know who the latest person is, and we escalated up the line regionally or state-wise. A classic example of where we've had some challenges in the past, but we're making some big inroads, is Aboriginal Lands Council are a fairly key player in terms of land, across many parts of BFMC areas around the state. But trying to get the right person with the authority to make decisions on activities in those areas has historically been a real challenge. We've actually got some significant inroads now through some of the Region West Indigenous project that we're running and the State Land Council to try and actually broker some of those relationships to get permissions and get engagement to get work done. So I'm not singling them out for any other reason than they're just an example. Everyone falls in the same boat, just knowing who the key players are and having them attend, or even if they don't attend, attendance is the ideal, but even if they don't attend, that doesn't impede activity going on. You know, the committee can make decisions and identify risks in their absence.
I think David wanted to.
To our BFMC meetings, but we do have a very good relationship with the contractors who do their work, particularly the ones that are doing it at the moment. And Jeff's had a lot of good contact with them. And even though there might be some areas of the zone you haven't seen something happening in, there's been a lot of work done in other areas, and we've got quite an extensive rail network right through. But just to reiterate, I know there's been some comments made by some of the panel tonight about how important the consultation process is, and I can't emphasise that too much. And I think that's a lot of the reason why our plan has worked so well, in that everything that we've done has had the ownership of the community, and they've been vitally involved. And also our staff have had a commitment and understanding as to the purpose of why we're here. And you know, we remember back to Victoria, and it was an emergency situation, those fires, that turned into a disaster. And Jim Molan said at the Royal Commission that our responsibility is to prevent those emergencies from turning into disasters and catastrophes. And if we can play a part in this planning process in making that happen, that's our purpose for being here. And with a supportive staff to help get it done. And the important thing is making risk planning relevant to people. People have got to know why they're doing it. And unfortunately, a lot of us over the years haven't understood why we did it. We haven't understood the complexities of it because it wasn't relevant. If it's not relevant to a community and not relevant to brigades and not relevant to staff, it's not going to have the same meaning as if it is really relevant. And if there's any lessons to come out of our experiences, is we've got to make it relevant to everyone so that they get a buy into it. We get rather excited and passionate around here about hazard reduction, and most other people think we're mad, but we think it's important.
Determined to go that local government can receive funding for hazard reduction along roadways. Yeah. So who does that go to? Does that go to the Bushfire Management Committee or?
Well, no, basically, well, they have access to funding through the BFMC. If the BFMC prioritises that's where they'd like some applications, then that can be considered that way. But we're currently channeling $6 million directly through the $6 million per annum directly through the RFS allocations at the local level, and then that's done in concert with the local manager directly to council. It's completely separate to the BFMC, and it's exclusively there for the expenditure of local government, and that's shared across the state on a.
So if we have a problem, I take it up to Dave.
Yeah, with everything. Everything. I mean, on a serious note, that is the easiest way, because whether it is something that can be dealt with directly with council, whether it's something that just goes entirely through the RFS, or whether it's something that goes through a BFMC, he's the principal conduit anyway for all of those things.
I did it yesterday. I wrote that letter to council 4 years ago.
So he knows what you're talking about already. You don't have to.
Thanks, Chairman Lee. Steve Goff from Washburn. Just a little question. Do the BFMCs have any involvement with the power companies regards wire and poles of age, inspection, whatever?
In what way, sorry?
Of age of poles, or age of insulators, or age of wire.
Well,
now that we're all getting charged a heap of money for poles and wires.
We can do hazard reduction, we can't solve the electricity.
Well, but on a related matter, following I made application recently in the last well, I think it was 2008, 2009, Dominic, we actually got some legislative amendment to actually have the power authorities as a statutory representative on the state's coordinating committee. So previously they weren't statutorily obligated to contribute and commit to that process. But we now have them on board, and as a matter of fact, as recent as today's meeting, they've actually taken a very comprehensive approach to statewide consistency in standards, performance. There's a detailed provision now in all their management programs around hazard reduction preparation and hazard reduction completion in and around their easements and their power line infrastructure. They're seeking better standards and consistency with the engagement of contractors and the works. What else did they touch on? Inspection regimes, where they're getting a consistency of field inspection regimes to actually target hotspots. Is probably, I didn't mean that as a good word, but it is about targeting hotspots and other things on easements. Inherent in all of that is about maintenance of equipment and the performance of that equipment, but they are on board in a more meaningful way. I suspect the environment, certainly since Victoria, has probably assisted in that regard. But we do have ability to contact them or engage them locally. They also contribute very much to the BFMC and the RFS more broadly in activities and training and works. And if we need to get stuff done that isn't being done, then again, David can get those contacts at the local level.
Thank you.
But they are purposely engaged now at the state level as well.
Yeah, they have been more active in the last 12 months.
That does not surprise me. I don't think that would surprise any of us.
I'd just perhaps like to say that, because I've had a bit to do with the Victorian power companies, but it's just a really interesting example of what acceptable risk is. So in Victoria we're spending an extra $700 million over the next 10 years to reduce that risk, but our power bills are going up and so on. And the power companies always go back and say, well, yeah, we can actually make it much safer. How much are we going to be allowed to actually put up the tariffs to achieve that? And so this is where the shared responsibility thing comes back a bit. What's an acceptable level of risk? It's not that we're going to make you safe, that we can't provide 100% safety. What's an acceptable level?
That's right.
And for that level of risk that's left behind, what can we do about that? So there are other ways of dealing with it. Can we get better, more rapid warning out to people? Can we actually provide some fire breaks around the power lines and so on? So it always is a balancing act, and that's why it's got to be a discussion. You can't just do it, someone arbitrarily sort of make a decision, because otherwise you've got no idea what you've been exposed to. Driving on the road is an acceptable level of risk that we've taken to drive on the road, because the utility of being able to drive down the road outweighs our chance of being killed when we go home tonight. So we're always making that acceptable level judgment, whether it's conscious or unconscious.
And the power companies have worked with us to establish their maintenance and performance standards to make sure we're comfortable with what they're doing in that program. Oh, sorry, it was your program statewide.